backlash that you guys have gotten.
Yeah, well, I think you're right. We're not just going to sit back and wait for the winds to blow this over. There's a lot that is in our control, and we don't want to feel like we're victims or helpless. I think luckily Coinbase, I'll talk about, there's different orders of ways to look at this. So the first order effect was literally like, what's the counterparty risk? There was contagion, there was others in the other dominoes that fell as a result of FTX obviously going down. And one thing this was sort of a learning going back to your prior question, was that the importance of risk controls inside these companies is incredibly important. And, we had an incredible finance team and CFO and leader who built a risk function within Coinbase over the prior years. And they were essentially underwriting every counterparty where we were storing funds with various things to operate our business. And we were, at some point during the crisis, we were actually underwriting some of these things daily, even bank partners and things like that, as you saw with Silvergate having issues. So that's kind of taking some of the best practices, frankly, from traditional financial services. And for the centralized actors in crypto, I think some of those skill sets are actually really, really needed. So that was one of the first things. But I guess just zooming out, what can we do? How can we actually proactively sort of counteract this narrative that's developing out there, which is that crypto is something that needs all this regulatory crackdown? Well, I think one thing is to say, look, we agree with it, right? Like the centralized actors, again, they should be brought within the regulatory perimeter. There's a misconception. I'm very surprised to hear this, but occasionally I'll interact with people in DC who still to this day believe that everybody in crypto essentially doesn't believe in regulation. They don't want to do KYC, AML. They're all trying to skirt the rules. And from where I'm sitting, it's almost like impossible to believe, how could this be true? Because for 10 years, we've been working on this, we've been saying this, but you just have to remember, these people are busy. They're not in crypto every day. They only hear things, anecdotally through their friends or through the media. They're living in a little bit of an echo chamber sometimes. And so just even repeating the very basic messages like that on the East Coast or in DC when we interact with folks, you can't kind of underestimate the power of that. Now, I think going beyond that of just showing up and having these meetings and, building the relationships, and I'm spending more and more of my time on the East Coast. The other big thing I think we can do is we need to activate our user base in crypto. And, there's some really great polling data that's come out recently, which shows that about 80% of Americans feel that the financial system doesn't work for them, right? And it's too slow, the fees are too high, it doesn't serve everybody equally. And so there's a real interest in sort of updating the financial system, if you will. And I really believe crypto is the most important technology that can update the financial system. So you've seen in Coinbase's messaging externally, internally, we've started to go out there and tell that story a little bit more. That's a message that I've seen is resonating with people who are, kind of crypto skeptics, or they're on the fence. They're thinking about crypto as being a financial product, and they're like, this is some unregulated financial product. And the point we're sort of making to them is, no, this is a technology. It's a technology that can improve financial services in a variety of ways, but it's not itself a financial product per se. And so what we've been doing is, another thing we've been doing is we put out actually this post, Crypto 435. People can Google it. What we're trying to do is get the community of crypto holders out there organized and say, let's elect leaders in the United States who believe in crypto. They want to make sure that this technology is the innovation potential of it is protected, but it's also, we protect against bad actors. And there's a sensible regulation for centralized players in crypto that could help make that happen. I'd encourage anybody to kind of go Google that, Crypto 435. And it's simple things. It's like, let's get donations, even like $100 from, 1 million crypto holders or something, or show up at town halls, ask these questions. These kinds of things can really move the needle. And if we elect representatives in a democracy who believe in our values around economic freedom, then all of these regulatory challenges are going to end up in a good place eventually.
Well, let's talk about this. So the analogy we've used at Bankless, like it really felt like this in 2022, is some of the kind of the scammers and the frauds of 2022 had this gigantic house party, right? And they destroyed everything, like the furniture's torn up, like plates are smashed, biggest, craziest house party match. There's a fire, like the cops show up, it's a complete mess. And now they're gone, but we are left to clean up after this party. And I want to get a sense of the magnitude of backlash that you guys might be seeing in DC, and we as a crypto industry now face. It feels like everything got a lot more hostile sometime after November of 2022. And we've talked about things like Operation Choke Point, which is this some strategy to kind of like choke out the banking sector in the US? There's like increased scrutiny on this industry, and it feels worse than it's ever been, at least in the US. I think, in Europe and other places, people are still sort of moving forward. Can you kind of just describe what it's like? Are you feeling that too? And like, if so, do we deserve this? Like, is this something that we caused?
Well, as an industry, I do think we deserve a little more scrutiny. I mean, that's probably fair to say. But yeah, I mean, look, there's a lot of people who they are only tangentially aware of crypto, right? And there's also, frankly, a lot of people who, a lot of what they think comes from media headlines, right? Which in crypto, that's actually increasingly becoming sort of an unpopular, uncommon thing. Most people have sort of realized that each media organization has sort of their own objectives they're trying to push in the world, and they're almost more like lobbying organizations in a way. And so they're getting their news from other things. But that's not true of the majority of people, especially I'd say people over 40 or 50 in the world. They grew up in a world where traditional media was like the main thing that they consume. So it's very simple. It's like if they see bad headlines, they start to get more skeptical. If they see positive headlines, they start to get more optimistic. And so that's not really fair. It may not even be accurate, but it is what's happening. And so as we get the media, sort of our messaging out there, we need to make sure we're using new media channels like podcasts, like, Bankless, YouTube, everything, Twitter, blogs, but also engaging with traditional media channels, because sort of some of these gatekeepers, policymakers, et cetera, they're a different generation. They're an older generation, and they are still using some of these traditional media channels. And it's very interesting to sort of get a sense of what kind of messaging really works with those folks, right? For the crypto native audience, probably like a lot of your listeners, this messaging about like economic freedom and decentralization and, like technical audiences, especially, that's the kind of thing that resonates the most with me when I read the Bitcoin white paper back in the day. For these audiences that are older, they're non-technical, they're not really in crypto necessarily for the same, religion or something like that we are, but they resonate with these messages around, the financial system needs to be updated. It's slow, it's archaic. The code is from 40 years ago, like the laws are from 100 years ago. And that message is actually pretty widely agreed by 80% of Americans. I'd say for Democrats, they're interested in equality of opportunity. They want to make sure people get fair access to financial services. That resonates with them. I think for Republicans, there's often an argument just about, actually economic freedom does resonate with Republicans, and also just sort of like in a pro-business, like national security type argument, they're saying, hey, this is a major tech trend. We need to have this industry built in America. It can't just be pushed offshore, just like what happened with semiconductors and 5G and now with AI. Like they're like, this is critical infrastructure to be built in America. We need to support our American companies. So you have to sort of tailor the message to the right audience, but this updating the financial system argument is the one we've found that works best in the broadest audience.
That's great. Yeah, we'll come back to this, but I think there's also like huge wins for the U.S. in terms of exporting its monetary policy and exporting the dollar via route of stablecoin. But we'll get there. One question that, because you've spent some time on the East Coast in D.C. now, one question that's I'm still perplexed about is how in the world. This is our last question on SBF, I promise. But like, how in the world did this guy get such influence in America's halls of power? There's like reports of like 1/3 of Congress had received donations, political donations from SBF. He clearly had the attention in DC. Like, how is this game played? And because if it is just kind of a money game, that does actually not make me very optimistic on like the democratic process and the systems of control and power in the US. But you've seen this from behind the scenes. And like, how is this game played, Brian? And how did this guy get so much influence in our halls of power?
I've asked myself that same question. And frankly, it's funny. I feel like I show up and I'm pretty easy to get along with. People, once they meet me, they're like, okay, this guy's clearly he's trying to do the right thing, and maybe I agree with him or disagree with him on some stuff, but he's just like a legitimate person trying to build something in the world. I'm an engineer by background. Like I sort of just, if people ask me a question, sometimes all I know how to do is say the answer. I think that SBF, so a few things. One, I think he had like an incredible passion for policy. Actually, he was spending an inordinate amount of time in DC. I think that he also, the shibboleths, right, which was the quote that he put out there, he basically started saying what they wanted to hear. Now, it wasn't really fully authentic, and so that ultimately blew up in his face, but he basically was framing these things in a way that was music to their ears for some of them, I guess maybe more on the Democrat side, and I think they got duped by it, and it wasn't even authentic if you look at some of his texts that got released and everything like that. So was that an effective strategy in the short term? Maybe, but it ultimately totally blew up in his face because you just can't be inauthentic with people. That's one of my learnings. If I disagree with somebody, I'd rather, I'm not going to be a jerk to their face or something, but I'm going to say what I actually think in a polite, respectful way. Because if I say something I don't believe, like they might leave the meeting feeling good, but then a week later or a year later when they realize I didn't even believe it, they're just going to feel even worse. And so in a way, I don't think I'm not sophisticated in how I play the game. I'm actually playing a very simple game, which is just I show up and I say what I think. But I think that's actually the right solution long term, that it's not a game at all. I'm just trying to be an authentic person. Now, by the way, I don't think donating money, I don't know how much his donations move the needle. It's definitely raises some big questions, and I hope some of that money gets clawed back in one way or another. I don't think donations are entirely bad. I think, the crypto community actually, if you look at the banking lobby or the oil and gas or any of these other industries, the motion, the entertainment industry or whatever, like they actually do put a lot of dollars behind their lobbying efforts in DC. And it's not all just companies doing it, by the way. It's the individuals, it's people. So there's something like 50 million people in the United States now who've used crypto. I mean, imagine if we even just got 1 million of those people, 1/50th, to become sort of politically active or donate $100 to the right candidate in their jurisdiction. And in every congressional race, when there's an open seat or whatever, there's going to be somebody who's more crypto positive and someone who's not. And we've actually started building some of this stuff into the Coinbase app so people can go look up in their area, what's the rating A through F of the people in your area. I think if we can get just 1 million people in the crypto space politically active, show up to the town halls, donate the money, like tweet about it and like build this movement, it's going to be incredibly powerful. DC does not yet, they don't yet respect the crypto lobby. They don't realize how big of a movement this is in the United States. It's bigger than some of the biggest ones you've thought about. Some of the most powerful lobbies. We actually have more people in crypto. And they don't realize that yet.
Oh my God, where do I sign? Where do I send money? Like seriously, if this could be organized and aggregated in an effective way, and maybe we'll talk about some ways Coinbase is doing that, like we would be happy to be a megaphone for this. This is for us. This is about it's about crypto, but I also live in the U.S. So does David. We care very much about the U.S. like protecting these digital liberties in the 21st century. And so I think we would have a large collective of not only small donations from a large motivated population, but the idea of like a crypto kind of movement. And a lobby group that is kind of bottom up from the people. But like your comment on the long game, you still think it's worth playing, Brian. You still think in the long run, your strategy of just telling people what you think, what you believe, the truth, reminding them is an effective strategy, that this is not a dead end. Because I think there's a certain segment of listeners out there, bankless listeners, who they've just given up on the political process. They've just given up on kind of regulators. They've just even given up on like voting. They will not show up to town halls because they no longer believe that the process works. And they'll even point to things like 2022, SBF, right? It was pay to play. It was just, lining politicians with money. And like the long game you're playing sounds nice, Brian, but like it doesn't work. It's not effective. These politicians are corrupt. You seem more optimistic than that. Can you give us the case for why we should be optimistic?
Yeah, I mean, look, I understand why people are cynical about it. It raised a whole bunch of questions about the process and does it work, and if not, where. There's a really great 2x2 graph that I love that shows up sometimes. I think it's from Edelman, but it shows sort of trustworthiness and competence, I believe, and it sort of compares different, government and NGOs and for-profit businesses. And for a while, there was sort of nobody in the top right quadrant who was both trusted and competent. And slowly, people have started to view, and government's not there, by the way, it's viewed as not trusted and incompetent if you believe this survey. Business is sort of increasingly moving into that top right quadrant. If you look at their recent data, and I think business basically